Hey guys. Tonight we are venturing deep into the humid embrace of ancient Mesoamerica, into a time long before the Aztecs or the Maya captured popular imagination. Picture yourself amidst a sea of green, where the air is thick enough to drink, and the sounds of unseen creatures form a constant living symphony. Giant stone faces, older than any written record from this part of the world, wait silently in the earth. You probably won't make it through this entire exploration of Mesoamerican lithic portraiture before drifting off, and frankly, that's the whole idea. But that's okay. The journey itself is what matters, a slow drift into the past. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking, or perhaps it's more accurate to say you're wading, through the undergrowth. The air is heavy, clinging to your skin like a second unwelcome layer. It's that kind of tropical humidity that makes you feel like you're breathing water, and your hair, if you have any, has probably achieved a level of frizz that science has yet to properly categorize. Sunlight struggles to pierce the dense canopy above, dappling the forest floor in an ever-shifting mosaic of light and shadow. Giant ferns, their fronds unfurling like primeval secrets, brush against you, leaving traces of cool moisture. The earth beneath your feet is soft, a mixture of loamy soil and decaying leaves that smells rich and ancient. Every step is an effort, the ground uneven, tangled with roots that seem to reach out like grasping fingers. You can hear the distant guttural roar of a howler monkey, a sound that seems to echo the very soul of this wild, untamed place. Closer, the incessant chirping and buzzing of insects forms a pervasive soundtrack, a constant reminder that you are but a visitor in a world teeming with life, much of it very small and very, very hungry. Perhaps you swat at a mosquito, a tiny descendant of countless generations that have called this jungle home, the real ancient civilization here, if we're being honest. They probably have little monuments to their greatest biters. As you push aside a curtain of hanging vines, their tendrils cool and slightly sticky, you sense a change in the atmosphere. It's subtle at first, a stillness, a quality of silence that underlies the jungle's noise. The air feels different. Heavier perhaps, or charged with an unspoken presence. You take a few more steps, your heart beating a little faster now, not with fear, but with a kind of anticipatory reverence. And then you see it. Looming from the earth, half buried, impossibly ancient, is a face. Not just a face, but a colossal carving of a human head, wrought from dark volcanic stone. It's enormous. Taller than you, wider than you can stretch your arms. Moss and lichen cling to its weathered surface, greens and grays painting patches across the stern, powerful features. The eyes, though lidless and blank, seem to gaze out with an unwavering stoic expression that has witnessed centuries, millennia, roll by. The lips are thick, slightly downturned, and the nose broad. There's an undeniable sense of individual personality captured in the stone, yet it also feels strangely universal, a portrait of authority, of solemn dignity. You might find yourself just standing there, mouth slightly agape, the humidity and the insects momentarily forgotten. How did this get here? Who carved it? And why? The sheer effort, the audacity of it is overwhelming. To quarry a block of stone this massive, transport it through this unforgiving terrain, and then to shape it with such skill and intention, it boggles the mind. We, with our modern cranes and power tools, would find it a challenge. Imagine doing it with nothing but stone tools, brute strength, and an unwavering vision. It's a testament to a people whose story is still being pieced together, fragment by enigmatic fragment. These are, of course, the Olmec colossal heads, some of the most mysterious and iconic artifacts from the ancient Americas. The Olmec civilization, one of the earliest complex societies in Mesoamerica, flourished in the tropical lowlands of south-central Mexico from approximately 1400 BCE to 400 BCE. They laid many of the cultural foundations for later civilizations, like the Maya and the Aztecs, from pyramid construction to ball games, to perhaps even forms of writing. As you gaze at this stone sentinel, it's easy to let your imagination wander. Who was this person? A mighty ruler, a revered ancestor, a powerful warrior, or perhaps something more symbolic? When these heads were first encountered by the wider world, theories abounded. Some early, more imaginative observers, noting the broad noses and full lips, proposed connections to African civilizations, or even survivors from mythical lost continents like Atlantis. These ideas, while certainly romantic, have been largely dismissed by mainstream archaeology, which firmly places the Olmec and their astounding creations within the indigenous traditions of Mesoamerica. There's a certain allure to those grand, sweeping narratives of lost worlds, but the reality of indigenous innovation and artistry is, in its own way, even more compelling. The jungle around you seems to press in, as if guarding its secrets. The light continues to shift, and shadows play across the stone features, making them seem to flicker with a hint of life. You might notice details now. The intricate headdress or helmet that adorns the head, different on each one discovered, perhaps indicating rank, lineage, or personal insignia. Archaeologists still debate the precise boundaries of the Olmec heartland and the full extent of their direct political control, but their cultural influence undeniably spread far and wide. The presence of these heads, so monumental and so specific in their style, speaks to a society with a strong sense of identity and the organizational power to create lasting monuments. You reach out, perhaps, to touch the cool, rough surface of the stone, feeling the faint vibrations of a world that vanished long ago, yet left these incredible markers of its passage. The story of their discovery, their meaning, and the people who made them is what we're here to explore very, very slowly. The first officially documented encounter with one of these stone giants, the one you're still picturing in your mind's eye, didn't happen with quite the same cinematic jungle trekking drama we just imagined, though the reality was certainly surprising enough for the man involved. Let's rewind the clock from our timeless, sleepy jungle moment to a slightly more precise, though still decidedly humid, 1862. Our protagonist in this part of the story is José María Melgar y Serrano, a Mexican scholar and explorer with a keen interest in the antiquities of his homeland. He wasn't out searching for lost civilizations with a bullwhip and a fedora. More likely, he was traveling, perhaps for more mundane reasons, when local accounts drew his attention. Imagine him, not necessarily battling through untamed wilderness, but perhaps on horseback or in a carriage, making his way through the state of Veracruz. The landscape would still have been lush, the air thick, but the specific area around the village of Tres Zapotes, nestled in the foothills of the Tuxtla Mountains, was likely a mix of cultivated land and patches of dense forest. He'd heard whispers, local stories from campesinos, farmers working their fields, tales of a cabeza colossal, a colossal head half buried in the earth on the Hacienda Hueyapan. Such stories often turn out to be folklore, natural rock formations mistaken for something more or perhaps smaller, less impressive artifacts. But something about these tales piqued Melgar's curiosity. You can almost picture him, wiping sweat from his brow, deciding to take a detour. One wonders if he packed an extra canteen of water, or perhaps just hoped the local villagers offered good coffee. Probably the latter. When he finally arrived at the location, guided by locals, what he saw must have been quite a shock. There it was, partially unearthed, a massive stone face peering out from the soil. This specific head is now known as Tres Zapotes Monument A. It wasn't fully excavated at the time, but enough was visible to reveal its extraordinary nature. The distinct features, the helmet-like headdress, and the sheer, undeniable size. Melgar, to his credit, recognized its significance. He wasn't just looking at a big rock. He was looking at a deliberate, sculpted artifact of immense antiquity. He arranged for it to be more fully uncovered, a task that would have involved considerable local labor, no easy feat with 19th century tools, and a multi-ton sculpture embedded in the earth. His subsequent report, published in 1869 in the Boletín de la Sociedad Mexicana de Geografía y Estadística, was the first scholarly description of such an artifact. In it, he described the head in detail, noting its features and what he termed its Ethiopian characteristics, a term reflecting the racial typologies and, frankly, some of the biases of his era. This observation, focusing on the broad nose and full lips, was what initially sparked those now debunked theories of an African connection to ancient Mesoamerica we touched on earlier. It's a reminder of how easily early interpretations can be shaped by the prevailing scientific and cultural lenses of the time. Historians still argue whether Melgar's Ethiopian comment was purely descriptive or carried deeper implications of transoceanic contact theories from the outset. Melgar's discovery, while groundbreaking, didn't immediately set the archaeological world on fire. It was a single, isolated find, and its true context was unknown. The Olmec as a distinct civilization hadn't been identified yet. For many decades, this Cabeza Colossal de Hueyapan remained something of an enigma, a fascinating but puzzling artifact from Mexico's deep past. Other travelers and antiquarians would visit it, marvel at it, perhaps even sketch it, but its full story, and the story of its creators, remain shrouded. Think of it like finding a single, incredibly complex microchip in the middle of a desert. You know it's important, you know it's advanced, but without the computer it belongs to, you're missing the bigger picture. The local people of Tres Zapotes, of course, had known about the head for far longer. To them, it was likely a familiar, if somewhat mysterious, landmark. Indigenous communities often have deep, long-standing relationships with ancient sites and artifacts, their own oral traditions and interpretations sometimes lost to or overlooked by later scholarly investigations. It's entirely possible that stories about the stone gods or ancient giants had been passed down through generations. One quirky tidbit is that sometimes these ancient monuments become incorporated into local folklore in unexpected ways. Perhaps a landmark for finding a particularly good patch of wild herbs, or a place where children were told not to play after dark, lest the stone giant awaken. The head itself, Tres Zapotes Monument A, is carved from basalt, a dark volcanic rock. It stands about 1.47 meters high, or just under 5 feet. Not the largest of the colossal heads that would eventually be discovered, but certainly imposing enough to make a statement. Its face is somewhat weathered, the features perhaps softened by centuries of exposure to the tropical elements, but the powerful, solemn expression is still clearly discernible. The helmet it wears is relatively plain compared to some others, with a distinctive strap across the forehead. Melgar's find was the crucial first breadcrumb. It was the initial pull on a thread that would eventually unravel a vast and complex tapestry of a forgotten civilization. Without his curiosity, his willingness to investigate local rumors, and his diligence in reporting his findings, the story of the Olmec might have taken much longer to emerge from the Veracruz soil. He provided the first tangible piece of the puzzle, a monumental stone face that silently challenged the then current understanding of Mesoamerican history. It sat there, in the relative quiet of Tres Zapotes, waiting for the world to catch up to its antiquity. A silent sentinel holding secrets of a culture that was, at the time, not even a name in the history books. The weight of its gaze, the sheer improbability of its existence, was a mystery that would slowly, painstakingly, begin to unfold over the following decades. You can almost feel the patience of the stone, unbothered by the fleeting concerns of human scholarly timelines. It had waited this long. It could wait a little longer. Following Melgar's intriguing but somewhat isolated report, the colossal head of Tres Zapotes, Monument A, continued to rest in its earthen embrace, a silent enigma. Decades passed. The world outside Hueyapan saw revolutions, technological leaps, and the ebb and flow of empires, while the stone face remained largely undisturbed, a secret held by the landscape and the local community. It wasn't until the 1930s and 1940s that the next significant chapter in the story of the colossal heads, and indeed the Olmec civilization, began to unfold, thanks largely to the efforts of one particularly tenacious archaeologist, Matthew William Sterling. Sterling, an American ethnologist and archaeologist working for the Smithsonian Institution, was a man with a keen eye for overlooked clues and a passion for Mesoamerican prehistory. He was aware of Melgar's earlier find, and it likely lingered in his mind as a piece of unfinished business, a mystery that deserved a deeper look. He wasn't just interested in individual artifacts, he was interested in the cultures that created them, the societies that rose and fell long before European contact. You can imagine him poring over old maps and dusty reports. The Tres Zapotes had a persistent question mark in his research. He was probably the kind of person who couldn't let a good puzzle go unsolved, the academic equivalent of someone who has to finish the Sunday crossword, no matter how obscure the clues. In 1938, Sterling, along with his wife Marion, who was an archaeologist in her own right and a crucial part of his expeditions, launched an expedition specifically to Tres Zapotes, sponsored by the National Geographic Society and the Smithsonian. They weren't just going to look at the head Melgar had documented. They were going to excavate, to search for context, for other clues that might illuminate who made it and when. This was no gentle Sunday dig. This was serious, often arduous work in a challenging tropical environment. Think mud, mosquitoes. So many mosquitoes they probably had their own social hierarchy, and the ever-present humidity we've become so familiar with. Marion Sterling, by the way, was known for her meticulous field notes and organizational skills, often managing the camp and logistics, proving that behind every great archaeological man, there's often an equally great, if sometimes less heralded archaeological woman. It was during this expedition, and subsequent ones in the early 1940s, that Sterling and his team made a series of spectacular discoveries that would fundamentally rewrite the early history of Mesoamerica. At Tres Zapotes, they not only re-examined Monument A, but also unearthed Stela C. This was a particularly crucial find because one side of it bore a Mesoamerican long-count calendar date corresponding to 32 BCE, or 31 BCE, depending on the correlation used. At the time, This was the oldest long-count date yet discovered, and it was found in association with Olmec-style artifacts. This was a bombshell. Previously, the Maya were considered the originators of this sophisticated calendrical system, and, by extension, the oldest advanced civilization in the region. Sterling's findings at Tres Zapotes suggested that another, older culture had been at play. But Sterling didn't stop at Tres Zapotes. He went on to investigate other sites in the region, most notably La Venta, in the neighboring state of Tabasco, and San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan in Veracruz. It was at La Venta, in 1940, that his team uncovered several more colossal heads, each one a breathtaking monument of artistry and engineering. These were not identical to the Tres Zapotes head. They had their own individual features, their own distinct headdresses, yet they clearly belonged to the same artistic and cultural tradition. The sheer number and scale of these discoveries were staggering. It became undeniable that Melgar's find was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a widespread and sophisticated sculptural tradition. One particularly famous story from Sterling's excavations at La Venta involves the discovery of La Venta Monument 1, also known as El Rey, the King. The local workmen, superstitious about disturbing the ancient idols, were initially hesitant to dig. Sterling, ever the pragmatist, reportedly had to use a combination of persuasion and payment to get them started. As the massive stone face began to emerge from the muck, its powerful features glaring upwards, even the most skeptical workers were said to have been awestruck. It's a classic image, the archaeologist caked in mud, looking down at a piece of history no one from the outside world had seen for perhaps 2,000 years. You can almost hear the collective gasp, quickly followed by the sound of shovels hitting the dirt with renewed, if slightly nervous, vigor. Through these expeditions, Sterling accumulated overwhelming evidence for a major ancient civilization that predated the classic Maya. He began to consistently use the term Olmec to refer to these people, borrowing an old Nahuatl, Aztec name meaning rubber people, which had been historically associated with the Gulf Coast region, the area where rubber trees were abundant. Historians still argue whether the people who created the colossal heads would have called themselves Olmec, or if this name is purely a later scholarly convention. It's almost certainly the latter, as we have no direct written records from the Olmec themselves telling us their name. Sterling's assertions about the antiquity of the Olmec and their status as a formative or mother culture for later Mesoamerican civilizations were initially met with considerable skepticism from some of his prominent contemporaries, particularly those heavily invested in the primacy of Maya civilization. The established narrative is often hard to shift, and Sterling was, in essence, proposing a radical reordering of the Mesoamerican timeline. Imagine the academic debates, probably conducted via strongly worded letters and at stuffy conferences, far removed from the mosquito-infested dig sites. Preposterous, some might have sniffed. The Maya are clearly the originators. But the sheer weight of the evidence Sterling unearthed, the colossal heads, the jade carvings, the distinctive art style, the early calendar dates, was difficult to ignore. Radiocarbon dating, a technique that became more widely available in the decades following Sterling's initial work, would eventually confirm his chronological framework. The Olmec sites of San Lorenzo and La Venta were indeed ancient, with San Lorenzo flourishing as early as 1200 BCE. Sterling, through his persistence, his systematic approach, and a little bit of luck, had effectively put the Olmec on the archaeological map, revealing them as one of the world's earliest pristine civilizations. That is, one that arose independently, without significant influence from other established civilizations. His work transformed the colossal heads from isolated curiosities into key symbols of this newly recognized, profoundly influential ancient culture. He didn't just find stones, he found a civilization. So, with Matthew Stirling's expeditions having firmly established the antiquity of these magnificent stone portraits and the civilization that created them, the next big question, naturally, was, who exactly were the Olmec? It's a question that, even today, doesn't have all its answers neatly filled in. Like a well-worn map where some territories are still marked "Here be dragons," or perhaps in this case, "Here be jaguars." We're peering back roughly 3,000 years, remember, into a society that left us no libraries of written texts explaining their political structure or their favorite type of tamale. What we have are their enduring material remains, the colossal heads, yes, but also intricate jade carvings, massive earthen pyramids, sophisticated drainage systems, and distinctive pottery. The Olmec heartland, or Olmecania, as it's sometimes called by archaeologists, is situated in the swampy coastal lowlands of the modern-day Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco, along the Gulf of Mexico. This is a region characterized by tropical rainforests, winding rivers like the Coatzacoalcos, and an abundance of lagoons and marshes. Not exactly the easiest place to build a large-scale civilization, you might think. It's hot, it's humid. Our old friend, humidity, is a constant companion in this story. And parts of it are prone to seasonal flooding. You'd need some serious ingenuity, or perhaps just a really good recipe for crocodile dung sunscreen to thrive here. Yet, thrive they did. The very environment that seems challenging to us provided them with rich alluvial soils for agriculture, primarily maize, beans, and squash, the classic Mesoamerican triad, and an abundance of riverine resources, including fish, turtles, and various aquatic birds. The term Olmec, as we touched upon, means rubber people in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. The Aztecs, who came along much, much later, flourishing from the 14th to 16th centuries CE, knew of this region as a source of rubber, which was used, among other things, to make the balls for the famous Mesoamerican ball game. It's unlikely, as we noted, that the people who carved the colossal heads called themselves Olmecs. That name is a label applied retrospectively by archaeologists. What they called themselves, their own name for their people or their territory, is lost to time, a whisper that the jungle has long since absorbed. The Olmec are often referred to as Mesoamerica's cultura madre, or mother culture. This is a concept championed by influential archaeologists like Alfonso Caso and Miguel Covarrubias, who, following Stirling's lead, saw the Olmec as the foundational civilization from which many of the characteristic traits of later Mesoamerican cultures, like the Maya, Zapotec, Teotihuacano, and eventually the Aztecs, were derived. These traits include things like monumental architecture, pyramids and ceremonial plazas, the aforementioned ball game, sophisticated calendrical and astronomical knowledge, though direct evidence of their full system is still debated. Specific religious iconographies, like the were-jaguar motif, a sort of supernatural human-jaguar hybrid, and, of course, traditions of kingship and elite portraiture, as exemplified by the colossal heads. This mother culture hypothesis, however, is not without its critics. Historians still argue whether the Olmec directly seeded all these developments in other regions, or if Mesoamerica was more of a mosaic of interacting cultures, with the Olmec being perhaps the earliest and most influential, but not necessarily the sole wellspring of all major innovations. Some scholars prefer a sister culture model, suggesting that various groups across Mesoamerica were developing complex societies and cultural traits more or less concurrently. influencing each other in a complex web of exchange and interaction. It's a bit like asking if rock and roll came only from Elvis, or if he was just the most visible and influential part of a much broader musical revolution happening at the time. The truth is likely somewhere in between. The Olmec were undeniably early and incredibly influential, setting a powerful precedent, but other cultures also contributed to the rich tapestry of Mesoamerican civilization. What is clear is that the Olmec achieved a remarkable level of social organization. Their major centers, such as San Lorenzo, flourishing c. 1400 to 1000 BCE, La Venta, c. 900, 400 BCE, and Tres Zapotes, showing occupation into the later Epi-Olmec period, were not just villages. They were ceremonial and political hubs with planned layouts, large-scale public works, and evidence of social stratification. At San Lorenzo, for instance, archaeologists have found an elaborate system of man-made ridges and aqueducts, constructed from hundreds of tons of carefully fitted basalt stones, designed to manage water, a testament to their engineering prowess. Imagine, not just carving giant heads, but also designing and building sophisticated plumbing systems in the middle of a tropical lowland. These weren't just artists. They were engineers. A quirky tidbit about the Olmec involves their apparent reverence for jade and other greenstones. These materials, not native to the Olmec heartland, were imported from distant sources, sometimes hundreds of miles away, like the Motagua River Valley in Guatemala. The Olmec artisans crafted incredibly fine objects from jade tilts, axe-like tools, often ceremonial, figurines, masks, and jewelry, often with a distinctive polish and iconography. The value they placed on greenstone, perhaps symbolizing water, fertility, and maize, is a recurring theme in Mesoamerican cultures, and the Olmec seem to have been pioneers in its ritual and artistic use. Some of these jade objects are so finely worked they almost look like they were melted into shape, a testament to the patience and skill of the carvers. The society that produced the colossal heads was evidently hierarchical. The sheer effort involved in quarrying, transporting, and carving these monuments implies a powerful elite capable of commanding significant labor resources. These were not community art projects whipped up on a whim. They were declarations of power, identity, and perhaps even divine connection, commissioned by rulers or paramount chiefs who wished to see their likenesses, or those of their revered ancestors, immortalized in enduring stone. The Olmec, then, were more than just rubber people. They were a complex, innovative, and highly influential society that laid critical groundwork for millennia of Mesoamerican cultural development. They were the sculptors of not only stone faces, but also of a new way of life in the ancient Americas, a way that involved settled agricultural communities, organized labor, sophisticated artistry, and the rise of powerful leaders whose visages still gaze out at us from across the ages. Their story is one of ambition, artistry, and a profound connection to their challenging, yet bountiful environment. Now that we have a sense of who the Olmec were, these pioneering people of the humid Gulf Coast lowlands, let's turn our attention back to the colossal heads themselves, and specifically, to the very beginning of their physical journey. The stone. These aren't just any old rocks picked up from a nearby field. The material used for the vast majority of the 17 confirmed colossal heads is basalt, a hard, dense, dark-colored volcanic rock. And it didn't come from the Olmec heartland sites like San Lorenzo or La Venta, which are situated in alluvial plains, far from any volcanic outcrops. No, the Olmec went to extraordinary lengths to procure these specific stones, a testament to their determination and organizational prowess. The primary source for the basalt used in the colossal heads, particularly those found at major centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta, lies in the Tuxtla Mountains. This volcanic range rises dramatically from the coastal plain, roughly 60 to 100 kilometers, that's about 37 to 62 miles, west or northwest of the main Olmec settlements. Imagine standing in the flat, swampy terrain of La Venta, surrounded by rivers and marshes, and knowing that the perfect, massive boulders for your monumental project are nestled high up in those distant, blue hazy peaks. It's not exactly a quick trip to the local stone yard. You're not just popping down to the quarry with a pickup truck. You're planning a major expedition. The specific type of basalt often comes from Cerro Sintepec, one of the volcanoes in the Tuxtla Range. This isn't a random choice. The basalt from this area is particularly suitable for carving, being relatively fine-grained and capable of holding detail, yet incredibly durable. The Olmec were clearly skilled geologists in their own right, able to identify and select the best quality stone for their purposes. They weren't just looking for big rocks, they were looking for the right big rocks. One imagines Olmec prospectors, perhaps shamans or specialized artisans, making arduous journeys into the mountains, scouting for suitable boulders, maybe even performing rituals to ask permission from the mountain spirits before undertaking such a monumental task. It's a far cry from clicking add to cart on a website for building supplies. Once a suitable boulder was selected, and we're talking about blocks of stone that, before carving, would have weighed significantly more than the finished heads, which themselves range from 6 to a staggering 50 tons. The real work began. First, the quarrying. Without metal tools, how did they detach these enormous chunks from the mountainside or from larger parent boulders? The process likely involved a combination of techniques. They might have used hard stone hammers and chisels to slowly peck and pound away at the rock. They could also have employed the method of fire setting, heating the rock with intense fires and then rapidly cooling it with water, causing it to crack and fracture. Levering with large wooden poles and using wedges again, likely made of very hard wood or stone, would also have played a part. It was a slow, laborious, and undoubtedly dangerous process. One misplaced strike, one shifting boulder, could have had dire consequences. You have to admire the sheer persistence, the unwavering focus required. And this wasn't just for one head. They did this repeatedly, for each and every one of those monumental sculptures. Each head represented a colossal investment of time, resources, and human effort, even before a single feature was carved. The act of bringing the stone from the sacred mountains to the ceremonial centers in the lowlands was, in itself, a powerful statement. It transformed a raw piece of the volcanic landscape into a culturally significant object, imbuing it with meaning and power through the very act of its arduous journey. Consider the terrain between the Tuxtla Mountains and sites like San Lorenzo. It's not a gentle downhill slope on a paved road. It's a complex landscape of hills, rivers, swamps, and dense tropical forest. There were no wheeled vehicles in ancient Mesoamerica for hauling heavy loads, and no draft animals like oxen or horses. The movement of these multi-ton basalt behemoths was achieved entirely through human power and ingenuity. Just picture the scene. Hundreds, perhaps even thousands of laborers. Sweat, muscle, and sheer willpower. They would have needed to clear paths, build ramps, and possibly construct causeways over soft ground. Historians still argue whether the primary method of long-distance transport was overland, using rollers and sledges, or if they utilized waterways for part of the journey. Given the network of rivers in the Olmec heartland, it's highly probable that rafts or large balsa wood canoes were employed whenever possible, especially for the final legs of the journey to sites like La Venta. which is situated on an island in a coastal swamp. Getting a 20-ton boulder onto a raft, and then navigating that raft downriver and through swamps without it capsizing or getting irretrievably stuck would have been an incredible feat of engineering and coordination. It's the kind of logistical challenge that would make a modern-day project manager break out in a cold sweat, even with all our fancy GPS and heavy machinery. The Olmec just had rope, logs, and a whole lot of people working together. The journey of the basalt from the Tuxtla Mountains was not just a practical necessity. It was likely imbued with symbolic significance. Volcanoes and mountains were, and still are in many indigenous Mesoamerican cosmologies, sacred places, sources of water, fertility, and power, often seen as portals to the supernatural world. Bringing stone from these potent locations to the heart of their communities would have linked their rulers and ceremonial centers directly to these sources of primordial power. The very material of the heads, therefore, carried an inherent sacredness and authority, even before the artist began to shape the features of a ruler or ancestor. The burden of the Tuxtlas was not just a physical weight. It was a conduit for the raw, elemental power of the landscape, carefully harnessed and brought into the human realm by the Olmec. Each head, then, is not just a portrait, but a piece of the sacred mountain itself, made to gaze upon the world of mortals. This makes the resting face of the colossal head even more profound, knowing the immense effort it took just to get the stone to its final destination. Having wrestled these colossal basalt boulders from the fiery heart of the Tuxtla Mountains, and then, through some truly heroic feat of ancient logistics, transported them across miles of unforgiving terrain to their settlements, the Olmec then faced the next monumental task: shaping these raw behemoths into the expressive, powerful portraits we see today. This is where the artistry truly comes to the fore, but it's an artistry born of incredible patience and an intimate understanding of their chosen medium. Remember, the Olmec accomplished this without the aid of metal tools. There were no hardened steel chisels, no iron hammers, no convenient power drills to speed things along. Their toolkit was one of stone, wood, and probably water and abrasive sands. Imagine the scene. A massive, roughly shaped basalt boulder, weighing many tons, now sits in a designated workshop area, perhaps near the main ceremonial precinct of San Lorenzo or La Venta. Around it, master sculptors and their apprentices gather. The air would be filled, not with the high-pitched whine of modern machinery, but with the rhythmic, percussive sounds of stone striking stone, a constant tap-tap-tapping, punctuated by heavier thuds. It would have been a slow, almost meditative process, each strike carefully considered. You can almost hear the sculptors discussing the stone, noting its grain, its flaws, planning their approach. Maybe they even had a preferred brand of stone hammer. Olmec. Okay, maybe not. That joke was a bit of a stretch even for me. The primary tools would have been hammerstones, peckers, and grinders, all made from stones harder than the basalt itself, such as quartzite or other tough igneous rocks. Pecking was likely the main reduction technique. This involves repeatedly striking the basalt surface with a pointed or edged stone tool, gradually bruising, pulverizing, and chipping away small fragments. Think of it as sculpting by 1,000 tiny impacts. It's an incredibly labor-intensive method, especially on a material as hard as basalt. Hours, days, weeks of pecking would be required to even begin to rough out the basic form of the head, the curve of the cranium, the projection of the nose and lips. They might have also used abrasion to shape and smooth the stone. This would involve rubbing the basalt with other stones, often with sand and water used as an abrasive slurry, much like using sandpaper today. but on a vastly more laborious scale. For finer details, such as the incised lines on the headdresses, or the subtle modeling around the eyes and mouth, they would have employed smaller, more precisely shaped stone tools. Burins, gravers, and drills, also made of stone. Some theories suggest that hollow reeds or bone, twirled with an abrasive like sand, could have been used for drilling or creating curved lines. It's a testament to their skill that they could achieve such subtle and naturalistic modeling with such seemingly simple tools. One mainstream historical fact is that Olmec sculptors were masters of working in 3 dimensions, understanding form and volume in a way that was truly sophisticated. The colossal heads are not just flat reliefs. They are fully realized sculptures in the round, meant to be viewed from multiple angles, though the front is clearly the primary focus. They exhibit a remarkable symmetry and balance, despite their immense size. The sculptors must have had a clear mental image, or perhaps even a smaller maquette or model, of the final product before they began, as major mistakes would have been difficult, if not impossible, to correct. Every chip and grind was a step towards revealing the face within the stone. A quirky or fringe tidbit that sometimes surfaces in discussions about ancient stone carving, particularly when dealing with very hard stones, is the idea of sound-assisted carving or even lost ancient technologies for softening stone. While these ideas are certainly evocative, there's no concrete archaeological evidence to support them in the Olmec context. The wear patterns on Olmec stone tools and the markings on the sculptures themselves are consistent with the known methods of pecking, grinding, and incising. The lost technology is more likely to be the sheer amount of human hours, dedication, and generational knowledge of stoneworking that the Olmec possessed. Sometimes the simplest explanation, immense painstaking labor, is the most accurate, even if it's less exciting than sonic chisels. The process would have been dusty, noisy, and physically demanding. The sculptors would have needed considerable stamina and strength. Water would have been essential, not just for the abrasive slurry, but to keep the dust down and perhaps to cool the stone as they worked. You can imagine them, faces streaked with stone dust and sweat, eyes narrowed in concentration as they brought forth the subtle curve of a lip or the powerful arch of an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether the colossal heads were carved by specialized guilds of artisans, or if the labor was more broadly distributed, perhaps with different teams responsible for different stages of the process. Given the skill and consistency of style, it seems likely that there was a dedicated class of highly trained sculptors. As the form began to emerge, the details would be refined. The distinctive helmet or headdress, unique to each head, would be carefully delineated. The ear spools, often large and elaborate, would be shaped. The facial features themselves, the slightly downturned mouth with its full lips, often described as Olmecoid, the broad nose, the heavy-lidded eyes, would be imbued with that characteristic expression of solemn authority. It's fascinating how these features are both stylized, conforming to a clear artistic canon, and yet also individualized, giving each head a distinct personality. You get the sense you're looking at portraits of specific individuals, not generic representations. Finally, after months, perhaps even years of work, the head would be finished. The surface might be smoothed to a surprising degree, given the tools available. Some heads show traces of plaster and pigment, suggesting they may have originally been painted in vibrant colors, though little of this remains today. Imagine these stern, gray visages, transformed with reds, yellows, whites, and blacks, making them even more striking and lifelike. The completion of a colossal head must have been a major event, perhaps celebrated with ceremonies and rituals, acknowledging the transformation of raw stone into a potent symbol of power and identity. The silence of the finished stone would then replace the cacophony of its creation, ready to begin its long watch. So, these magnificent stoic faces, quarried, transported, and carved with such immense effort, now gaze out at us from across the millennia. But the crucial question remains, who are they? Who were these individuals deemed so important that their likenesses were immortalized in tons of volcanic basalt? This is one of the most enduring mysteries surrounding the Olmec colossal heads, and while we don't have definitive name tags or accompanying autobiographies carved into their foreheads, scholars have developed several compelling theories based on the available archaeological and iconographic evidence. You can almost feel the heads challenging you to guess, their stone lips sealed in a knowing ancient silence. The most widely accepted theory, and the one that aligns with much of what we know about later Mesoamerican cultures, is that the colossal heads are portraits of Olmec rulers. In many ancient societies, monumental portraiture was a prerogative of kings and powerful leaders, a way to project their authority, legitimize their rule, and ensure their legacy. Think of the statues of Roman emperors or Egyptian pharaohs. The Olmec heads, with their individualized features and commanding presence, fit this pattern well. Each head is distinct, suggesting they represent specific people rather than idealized types. The elaborate headdresses or helmets, which vary significantly from one head to another, could be indicative of personal insignia, lineage markers, or symbols of royal office. It's like each ruler had their own unique crown or ceremonial gear, carefully recorded in stone. If they are indeed rulers, then these monuments would have served multiple purposes. They would have been powerful public statements of the ruler's authority, perhaps placed in prominent locations within ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta, where they would awe and impress the populace, as well as any visiting dignitaries or rivals. They could also have played a role in dynastic succession, asserting the continuity of rule by linking the current leader to his powerful ancestors. Imagine a new ruler coming to power and commissioning his own colossal head, placing it alongside those of his predecessors, a stony lineup of a royal dynasty. It's a bit like an ancient version of Mount Rushmore, but with more helmets and presumably fewer tourists asking where the gift shop is. Another possibility, or perhaps a complementary one, is that the heads represent venerated ancestors. In many Mesoamerican cultures, ancestors played a crucial role in legitimizing the power of living rulers and ensuring the well-being of the community. These stone portraits could be memorials to deceased leaders, their images serving as focal points for rituals intended to maintain a connection with the spirit world and harness ancestral power. The solemn, almost timeless expressions on many of the heads could certainly be interpreted as befitting such a role-wise, watchful guardians from the past. Some scholars have proposed that the figures depicted might be famous warriors or heroes. The helmet-like headgear is often cited in support of this idea, as it bears some resemblance to protective head coverings. Olmec society, like any complex society, would have had its share of conflict, and successful military leaders could certainly have achieved a status worthy of monumental commemoration. However, the heads generally lack overtly aggressive or martial iconography beyond the helmets themselves. They don't typically brandish weapons or display captive figures, common themes in the war-related art of other Mesoamerican cultures. So, while a warrior aspect can't be entirely ruled out, it doesn't seem to be the primary emphasis. A more esoteric theory, though less mainstream, suggests that the heads could represent deities or semi-divine beings. Olmec religion was complex, featuring a pantheon of gods often depicted with animalistic or composite features, most famously the were-jaguar. While the colossal heads are clearly human in their primary features, their sheer size and the immense effort invested in their creation could imply a connection to the supernatural. Perhaps they are portraits of rulers who were also seen as divine, or as intermediaries with the gods. In many ancient cultures, the line between king and god was often blurred. Historians still argue whether the Olmec rulers were considered fully divine right monarchs, or high priests with exceptional spiritual authority. The heads, in their imposing grandeur, could certainly support any of these interpretations. One intriguing aspect is that all known colossal heads depict male figures. There are no colossal queen heads, at least none discovered so far. This suggests that formal leadership in Olmec society, at least the kind commemorated in this monumental fashion, was predominantly or exclusively male. This doesn't mean women held no power or influence, but their roles might have been expressed in different ways, perhaps not through giant stone portraits. A quirky tidbit often discussed is the individuality of the facial features. While they share a common Olmec look, the full lips, broad noses, slightly almond-shaped eyes, each face is unique. Some look younger, some older, some have serene expressions, others look more stern or even slightly pained. San Lorenzo Monument 17, for example, has a particularly striking, almost fierce expression, with a deeply furrowed brow. This individuality strongly supports the idea that these are portraits of real people. It's as if the Olmec sculptors were the court portraitists of their day, tasked with capturing not just a likeness, but perhaps also a sense of the ruler's personality or character. You wonder if any ruler ever said, "Can you make my nose look a bit less Olmec-y?" Probably not. They likely embraced the distinctive aesthetic. The identity of these stone figures is a puzzle that continues to fascinate. Without written inscriptions directly associated with the heads telling us this is King Pokey McTasselhat, ruler of the Western Swamp District, we are left to interpret the silent clues, the context of their discovery, their distinct iconography, and comparisons with other forms of Olmec art and later Mesoamerican traditions. But the prevailing consensus remains strong. These are most likely the faces of powerful Olmec rulers, men who commanded vast resources, presided over complex societies, and whose legacy was deemed so significant that it was literally set in stone, ensuring their gaze would endure long after their cities had crumbled and their language had faded into the whispers of the jungle. Their power is still palpable, even in the quiet, controlled environment of a museum or the recontextualized space of a modern park. They still command attention. We've touched upon the monumental task of quarrying the basalt and the incredible artistry involved in carving these colossal heads. But sandwiched between these two colossal efforts is perhaps the most bewildering aspect of their creation: the transportation. How, in a world without wheels for hauling, without draft animals, did the Olmec move these multi-ton monoliths from the Tuxtla Mountains to their ceremonial centers, distances that could stretch up to 100 kilometers or over 60 miles through some of the most challenging terrain imaginable? This is where Olmec ingenuity and sheer cooperative power truly boggle the modern mind, and where the story becomes less about fine art and more about brute force engineering meeting a very big, very stubborn rock. Let's repaint the scene you might be drowsily picturing. A freshly quarried, roughly shaped basalt boulder, weighing anywhere from, say, 10 to over 50 tons, significantly more than the finished head because it hasn't been fully sculpted yet, is perched precariously on a mountainside or in a quarry high in the Tuxtlas. The destination? A place like San Lorenzo, situated on a plateau overlooking the Coatzacoalcos River basin. Or La Venta, an island in a swampy region near the Tonala River. There are no highways, no conveniently placed railways, not even a decent dirt track for much of the route. You're looking at dense tropical forest, steep ravines, undulating hills, wide rivers, and vast, squishy swamps. It's an ancient episode of World's Toughest Moves, but with significantly more at stake and considerably fewer commercial breaks. The most commonly accepted theory for overland movement involves the use of wooden sledges and rollers. Imagine a massive, specially constructed sledge made from durable hardwood logs, perhaps with an upturned front like a ski to help it glide over obstacles. The colossal stone would be carefully maneuvered onto this sledge, a feat in itself, likely involving levers, ramps, and a lot of precarious balancing. Then, hundreds, possibly even thousands of individuals would be organized to pull this immense load using strong ropes, likely made from plant fibers like agave or yucca. Think of a human-powered locomotive inching its way forward. To reduce friction, they would have laid down a path of wooden rollers in front of the sledge. As the sledge moved over the rollers from behind would be picked up and carried to the front, a continuous, painstaking process. It's slow, it's exhausting, and it requires incredible coordination. One slip, one snapped rope at the wrong moment, and disaster could ensue. The manpower required would have been enormous. Archaeologists estimate that it might have taken as many as 1,500 people several months to move a single large colossal head from the mountains to a site like San Lorenzo. This implies a society with a highly organized labor system, capable of conscripting or otherwise motivating a huge workforce for extended periods. These weren't just casual volunteers showing up on a Saturday. This was a major state-level undertaking. You have to wonder about the logistics of feeding and watering such a large crew, far from their homes, for weeks or months on end. It's a project management nightmare that makes assembling flat-pack furniture seem like a walk in the park. And then there are the rivers. The Olmec heartland is crisscrossed by them. While rivers could potentially be an advantage, allowing for water transport, they also presented significant obstacles. How do you get a 30-ton stone across a wide river if it's not navigable by raft directly from the quarry? Perhaps they built temporary pontoon bridges, or ferried smaller stones to build causeways. If they did use rafts, as seems highly likely for at least part of the journey, especially for sites like La Venta, the construction of these rafts would have been a major engineering challenge in itself. They would need to be incredibly buoyant and stable to support such immense weight. Giant balsa logs lashed together are a possibility. Guiding such a heavily laden raft downriver, navigating currents and avoiding shallows or snags would require immense skill and a bit of luck. One can imagine the chanting and rhythmic effort, the shouts of foremen, the constant tension. Historians still argue whether the Olmec constructed actual roads or causeways for this purpose. There is some archaeological evidence at San Lorenzo of causeway-like features, packed earth and stone constructions that could have facilitated the movement of heavy objects. Building such infrastructure across swamps or uneven ground would have been another layer of immense labor, but perhaps a necessary one to ensure the safe passage of their precious cargo. The investment in creating these pathways speaks to the importance and regularity of these stone-moving operations. They weren't just dragging them willy-nilly through the jungle. One quirky or fringe tidbit that sometimes gets discussed in relation to moving massive stones in the ancient world is the idea of acoustic levitation or other lost super technologies. While it's fun to imagine Olmec priests chanting a boulder into floating, much like the stone-on-stone carving methods, the evidence strongly points to good old-fashioned human muscle, ingenuity, and an awful lot of sweat. The technology was the incredible social organization that could bring so many people together for a common arduous purpose. It's a reminder that sometimes the most astounding human achievements are not about mysterious lost sciences, but about what organized communities can do with relatively simple tools and immense determination. The entire process, from quarry to carving site, would have been a spectacle, a demonstration of the ruler's power and the community's collective strength. It wasn't just about getting a rock from point A to point B. It was a performance of social cohesion and elite control. The successful arrival of a new basalt monolith would have been a cause for celebration, a triumph over the challenges of nature and logistics. Each head, therefore, carries within its stony silence the echoes of this incredible human effort, the grunts of exertion, the snap of ropes, the splash of oars, and the directives of overseers. It's a story of a people who literally moved mountains, or at least very significant pieces of them, to honor their leaders and shape their sacred landscapes. The resting and resting face takes on a whole new meaning when you consider the journey it took to get there. They probably needed a good long nap after each delivery. Now that we've wrestled with the sheer effort of getting these colossal stones to their destinations and the meticulous process of carving them, let's draw a little closer. Virtually, of course, unless you happen to have one in your living room, which would be quite the conversation starter. Let's examine the faces themselves, these powerful visages that have become so iconic. What can we learn from a closer look at their features, their distinctive headdresses, and other adornments? The Olmec sculptors, as we've seen, were not just skilled craftspeople. They were keen observers, embedding a wealth of cultural information into these stony portraits. Even if we're still deciphering all of its nuances, you might find yourself noticing details you hadn't focused on before, as your eyelids grow a little heavier. Perhaps the most immediately striking feature of most colossal heads is the helmet or headdress. No two headdresses are exactly alike, which strongly supports the theory that these are portraits of specific individuals, likely rulers, each with his own unique regalia. These aren't just simple hats, they are complex constructions, often featuring incised patterns, raised elements, and straps. Some helmets are relatively plain, perhaps indicating a particular rank or a specific type of rulership, while others are incredibly ornate, adorned with symbols that are still not fully understood. For example, San Lorenzo Head 1, also known as El Rey, wears a helmet that seems to be made of cloth or plaited material, with a distinctive jaguar paw emblem hanging down over the forehead, a clear link to the powerful jaguar imagery prevalent in Olmec art. This ties into the mainstream historical fact that the jaguar was a central figure in Olmec cosmology, symbolizing power, shamanistic transformation, and the earth itself. The headdresses often cover the ears, or at least partially obscure them. However, when the ears are visible, or when details can be discerned beneath the helmet flaps, they frequently display large ear spools or ear flares. These were common symbols of elite status throughout Mesoamerica for millennia, and the Olmec were no exception. These adornments could be made from various materials in real life: jade, shell, ceramic, or other precious stones. But in the stone portraits, they are rendered as part of the headdress complex, or as distinct, often disc-shaped ornaments. They contribute to the overall impression of dignity and high rank. You can almost imagine the satisfying clink they might have made, a subtle sound of authority. Moving to the faces themselves, the features, while sharing a certain Olmec family resemblance, show remarkable individuality. The eyes are typically almond-shaped, often with heavy eyelids, giving them a somewhat contemplative or even sleepy look. perfect for our current purposes. The gaze is usually direct and unwavering, conveying a sense of focused power. The noses are broad, and the lips are full, often with a distinct downturn at the corners, a feature so characteristic that it's sometimes called the Olmec mouth. This particular mouth shape is often associated with the were-jaguar motif, a supernatural being, part human and part jaguar, that appears frequently in Olmec art. It's possible that this feature on the colossal heads was meant to subtly link the rulers to this powerful spiritual entity, suggesting a shamanistic aspect to their authority or a divine connection. The overall facial structure is typically strong and fleshy, conveying a sense of robust health and vitality. Some heads appear younger, with smoother features, while others show more maturity, perhaps even a hint of jowling or lines around the mouth and eyes, adding to their portrait-like quality. For instance, La Venta Monument 4 has a notably serene, almost beatific expression, while San Lorenzo Head 6, also known as El Nene before its reclassification, has a more compact, intense look. Historians still argue whether these variations in expression were intentional attempts to capture the personality of the ruler, or if they simply reflect the stylistic conventions of different workshops or time periods. One quirky tidbit relates to the occasional presence of what appear to be incised lines or scarification marks on the cheeks of some heads, or even inlaid elements in the eyes or teeth, though these are rare and often subject to debate about their originality or meaning. Such modifications, if indeed present, would have added another layer of individuality and cultural signification. Imagine if they had little jade inlays for pupils. That would be quite a striking effect. Another feature to note is the back of the heads. While the faces are clearly the primary focus, the backs are not unfinished. They are typically rounded and smoothed, sometimes with details of the helmet continuing around. Some heads, like San Lorenzo Head 2, even have intricate, mat-like patterns carved on the back, possibly representing a type of woven head covering or a specific symbolic design. This attention to the entirety of the sculpture indicates that they were conceived as fully three-dimensional objects, perhaps meant to be seen from multiple viewpoints, even if only occasionally. The scale itself is, of course, a defining feature. These are not subtle, retiring portraits. They are monumental declarations. The sheer size ranging from about 1.5 meters, around 5 feet, to over 3.4 meters, over 11 feet, in height and weighing many tons, communicates immense power and importance. They literally loom, demanding attention and respect. When you stand before one, even in a museum setting, you can't help but feel a sense of awe at the ambition and skill involved. They are designed to make you feel small, to impress upon you the might of the individual depicted and the society that could produce such a work. As you picture these details, the varied helmets, the ear adornments, the distinct facial expressions, the powerful set of the jaw, the subtle curve of the lips, you begin to build a more intimate connection with these ancient rulers. They cease to be just big stone heads and become individuals frozen in time, their identities still partially cloaked in mystery, but their presence undeniably potent. They are a testament to an age when leaders sought to project their image in the most enduring way they knew how, through the patient shaping of volcanic stone, leaving us these enigmatic and deeply compelling faces to ponder as we drift towards sleep. As we continue to gaze, in our mind's eye, at these formidable stone countenances, another intriguing and somewhat perplexing aspect comes into focus. Many of the Olmec colossal heads show evidence of damage, mutilation, or even recarving. This isn't just the gentle weathering of centuries of exposure to tropical rain and encroaching jungle. though that certainly has taken its toll. We're talking about deliberate alterations, often quite extensive, made in antiquity. This raises a host of questions. Why would someone intentionally damage or change these monumental, labor-intensive sculptures? Was it an act of desecration, a ritualistic killing of the image, or something else entirely? The evidence for this intentional modification is quite clear on several of the heads. You might see large pockmarks, as if the stone was repeatedly battered with heavy objects. Some heads have flattened noses or lips, areas that appear to have been systematically ground down. Grooves and deep gashes, clearly not part of the original design, mar some surfaces. For example, San Lorenzo Head 5 has significant pitting on its face and headdress. Tres Zapotes Monument A, the very first head documented by Melgar, remember him from our earlier sleepy wanderings, shows signs of having features resculpted. It's almost as if these Stoic rulers were subjected to a post-reign critique, not with strongly worded op-eds, but with stone hammers. One of the leading theories is that this mutilation was a form of iconoclasm, an act of ritually defacing or killing the power of a ruler upon his death, or perhaps when his dynasty was overthrown. In many cultures, images are believed to contain the essence or power of the person they represent. By damaging the portrait, you neutralize that power, preventing it from harming the living or asserting its continued influence. If a new ruler or a rival faction came to power, they might have systematically defaced the monuments of their predecessors as a way to symbolically erase their legacy and assert their own dominance. It's a rather aggressive form of political campaigning, essentially saying, "That last guy? Yeah, we're literally hammering his face in." Another possibility is that the damage was part of a termination ritual when a ceremonial center itself was abandoned. Olmec centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta were not occupied indefinitely. They experienced periods of decline and eventual abandonment. It's conceivable that as part of the process of leaving a sacred site, the monuments associated with its power and ritual life were deliberately decommissioned or closed down through physical alteration. This wouldn't necessarily be an act of anger or disrespect, but rather a way of ritually concluding an era, releasing the sacred energy tied to the objects, or preventing them from falling into the wrong hands. Then there's the intriguing theory of recarving. Some scholars suggest that certain heads weren't just damaged, but were actually reworked from even earlier monuments. The most common hypothesis here is that some colossal heads might have originally been large Olmec thrones or altars, particularly the massive rectangular stone blocks often referred to as altars, though their function is debated, with some suggesting they were indeed thrones. These thrones often feature a ruler figure emerging from a niche, and are themselves monumental carvings. The idea is that when a ruler died, or when the throne was no longer needed for its original purpose, this massive, already quarried and transported block of basalt could be efficiently recycled into a colossal head portrait, perhaps of that very same ruler or his successor. This would explain why some heads have a slightly flattened or truncated appearance at the back, or unusual proportions, as if they were constrained by the shape of a pre-existing monument. San Lorenzo Head 7, for example, is often cited as a potential candidate for having been recarved from an altar throne. This theory of reuse is a mainstream historical fact, or at least a very strongly supported hypothesis, within Olmec studies. If this recarving theory is correct, it speaks volumes about Olmec pragmatism and their attitude towards these sacred stones. While the stones were clearly valued and imbued with power, they were not necessarily seen as inviolable once their initial purpose was served. The material itself, the basalt from the sacred Tuxtla Mountains, remained potent and could be given new life, new meaning, new form. It's a rather sustainable approach to monumental sculpture, if you think about it. Reduce, reuse, recarve. Why go to all the trouble of hauling another 50-ton boulder from the mountains if you've got a perfectly good, slightly used throne sitting right there? A quirky tidbit related to this is the occasional discovery of fragments of colossal heads, or pieces that look like they were flaked off during a recarving process, incorporated into later constructions at Olmec sites. It's as if no piece of this precious, hard-won basalt was allowed to go to waste. It reinforces the idea that the stone itself held significance. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for mutilation was destructive iconoclasm or ritualistic transformation, decommissioning. The truth may be complex, with different heads being damaged for different reasons at different times. It's also possible that some damage occurred during conflicts between different Olmec centers or with outside groups, though direct evidence for large-scale warfare is somewhat debated for the earliest Olmec periods. The act of defacing or recarving these powerful images adds another layer to their already complex story. It reminds us that these were not static objects sitting passively in the landscape. They were active participants in the social and political dramas of their time, their forms and meanings subject to change as power shifted and new eras dawned. The very scars they bear are a testament to their importance. You don't bother to ritually kill or painstakingly rework something that doesn't matter. These acts of alteration, whether destructive or transformative, underscore the immense symbolic weight these colossal heads carried within Olmec society. As you drift off, you might ponder the hands that struck these blows, or patiently ground down these features, and the complex motivations that guided their actions, adding yet another whisper to the ancient enigma. While our journey began with the first documented head at Tres Zapotes, and then focused heavily on the pioneering work of Matthew Stirling at sites like San Lorenzo and La Venta, it's important to remember that these aren't the only places where these enigmatic stone faces have emerged from the earth. The Olmec colossal head phenomenon, while concentrated in their heartland, has a slightly wider distribution, and each discovery site adds another piece to the puzzle of their meaning and the reach of Olmec influence. As we delve into other locations, try to imagine the subtle variations in the landscape, perhaps a slightly different bend in the river, a unique arrangement of mounds, but always that same humid air and the profound sense of antiquity. La Venta, located on an island in a swamp near the Tonala River in present-day Tabasco, is perhaps the most famous Olmec center after San Lorenzo, and it yielded some truly spectacular colossal heads. Flourishing primarily between about 900 BCE and 400 BCE, after San Lorenzo's main period of influence, La Venta was a major ceremonial and political hub. Stirling's excavations there in the 1940s, as we've touched upon, brought 4 colossal heads to light. Monuments 1, 2, 3, and 4. These La Venta heads are renowned for their artistry and preservation. Monument 1, often called El Rey, is particularly majestic, with a commanding presence and a relatively elaborate helmet featuring what some interpret as stylized talons or claws. It's one of the most iconic and frequently reproduced Olmec heads. The La Venta heads, like those at San Lorenzo, were strategically placed within the ceremonial precinct, often associated with large earthen mounds and plazas, underscoring their role in public ritual and expressions of power. One interesting feature of La Venta is Complex A, a meticulously planned ceremonial area that included a large conical pyramid, one of the earliest in Mesoamerica, mosaic pavements made of serpentine blocks buried as offerings, and numerous tombs and caches filled with exquisite jade objects, The colossal heads at La Venta were part of this grand ceremonial landscape, reinforcing the sanctity and importance of the site. The famous offering of massive jaguar mosaics, deliberately buried soon after their creation, speaks to the Olmec understanding of ritual and the cyclical nature of power and sacredness. Perhaps the heads too were part of this cycle of creation, display, and eventual ritual closure. But San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan in Veracruz is considered the earliest major Olmec center, reaching its apogee between about 1400 BCE and 1000 BCE. A total of 10 colossal heads have been discovered here, making it the site with the most finds. This is a mainstream historical fact. San Lorenzo boasts the largest number of these monuments. The San Lorenzo heads are, in some ways, considered the classic Olmec style, often exhibiting a powerful, somewhat stern naturalism. We've mentioned several of them already. Their placement on the San Lorenzo Plateau, which was itself extensively modified with artificial ridges and causeways, suggests a carefully planned display of royal authority. The sheer concentration of heads at San Lorenzo points to its paramount importance during the early heyday of Olmec civilization. It was clearly the place to be if you were an Olmec ruler wanting your portrait carved. Probably had a waiting list. Tres Zapotes, where Jose Melgar encountered the very first head, also yielded the second colossal head, known as Monument Q. So, 2 heads from this site. Tres Zapotes is interesting because it had a very long period of occupation, continuing into what is known as the Epi-Olmec period, after the decline of the main Olmec heartland centers. The Stela C found there, with its early long count date, highlights its importance in the later phases of, or transitions from, Olmec culture. The style of the Tres Zapotes heads is sometimes considered slightly different, perhaps reflecting this later date or regional variation. Beyond these big 3 sites, there are a few other more isolated finds. One head, known as the Cobata head or Elvigia head, was found on the slopes of the Elvigia volcano in the Tuxtla Mountains themselves. This is a truly enormous head, perhaps the largest of all, estimated to weigh around 40 tons. Its stylistic features are somewhat different from the Heartland heads. Its eyes are closed or downcast, and its features are more rugged, almost cruder. Historians still argue whether the Cobata head represents a distinct regional style, an earlier prototype, or perhaps even a different function or meaning due to its direct association with the volcanic source of the basalt. Its isolated location, far from any major ceremonial center, is also puzzling. Was it a monument to the mountain spirit itself? Or a failed attempt to transport an unusually large stone that was then finished in situ? Another head, known as Takalik Abaj Monument 23, was discovered far to the southeast, in what is now Guatemala, at the site of Takalik Abaj. This site shows both Olmec and early Maya influences, making it a crucial location for understanding the interactions between these 2 major cultural spheres. The Takalik Abaj head is stylistically Olmec, but its discovery so far from the Olmec heartland raises questions about the extent of Olmec political control versus cultural influence. Was it made by Olmec sculptors on site, or by local artisans adopting Olmec styles? Or was it perhaps even transported there? An incredible feat if true. A quirky tidbit. The 17th confirmed colossal head is a more recent addition to the corpus. It was discovered in 1994 by agricultural workers at the site of San Lorenzo, near an area called Llano del Jacaro. This head, designated San Lorenzo Monument 61, its numbering can be confusing as sites often have many monuments beyond just the heads, is smaller than many others, and somewhat eroded. but clearly fits the colossal head tradition. Its discovery highlights the fact that more of these incredible sculptures could still be lying hidden beneath the soil, awaiting rediscovery. Imagine stumbling upon one while planting your corn. Quite the surprise. Each of these locations, La Venta with its grand ceremonialism, San Lorenzo with its sheer number of portraits, Tres Zapotes with its late persistence, the enigmatic Cobata head in the mountains, and the distant Takalik Abaj head adds a different shade to our understanding. They show us that the tradition of carving colossal heads was a core element of Olmec identity, particularly for their ruling elite, and that this tradition was maintained over centuries and across different centers, with regional variations and evolving styles. The giants of La Venta, therefore, are part of a larger family of stone rulers, each with its own story, its own journey, and its own silent testimony to the power and artistry of the Olmec world. As you drift, perhaps you can see them arrayed across the landscape, a network of watchful stony guardians. Having explored the heartland sites where most of these magnificent stone portraits were created and displayed, it's time to zoom out a little, to consider the ripples that the Olmec civilization sent across the wider Mesoamerican world. The colossal heads themselves are largely confined to the Olmec heartland, with that one notable outlier in Takalik Abaj, Guatemala, that we just touched upon. However, Olmec art styles, religious concepts, and cultural practices were far more widespread, influencing many other groups and laying a foundation for subsequent civilizations. The echoes of the Olmec, like the lingering scent of copal incense in a long-abandoned temple, can be detected in many corners of ancient Mesoamerica. The Olmec are often described, as we know, as the mother culture. While this concept is debated, with some preferring sister culture models of interaction, there's no denying the profound and early impact of Olmec artistic and ideological systems. Think of it like a very influential band whose music inspires countless others. Even if those other bands develop their own unique sounds, you can still hear traces of the original in their work. Olmec influence is seen in regions as far-flung as the highlands of central Mexico, down through Oaxaca, and into parts of Chiapas, Guatemala, El Salvador, and even Honduras. This wasn't necessarily a case of Olmec armies marching out and conquering vast territories to create a sprawling empire in the Roman sense. Instead, their influence seems to have spread primarily through trade networks, the exchange of luxury goods, and the prestige associated with their sophisticated culture and religious ideas. One of the most recognizable Olmec artistic exports is their distinctive style of carving, particularly in jade and serpentine. Small, portable Olmec-style objects, figurines depicting the were-jaguar, celts incised with abstract symbols, and distinctive baby face figures, plump, infantile characters with snarling mouths, have been found in archaeological contexts hundreds of miles from the Gulf Coast heartland. These objects may have been traded as elite goods, carrying with them the religious and political ideologies of the Olmec. Imagine a local chief in a distant highland valley receiving a beautifully carved Olmec jade piece. It would have been a symbol of status and connection to a powerful, prestigious culture. It's like owning a designer handbag today, but with more supernatural jaguar connotations. The Olmec were also pioneers in the development of iconography that would become central to later Mesoamerican religions. The were-jaguar, that composite creature, part human, part jaguar, often with a cleft head and snarling mouth, is perhaps the most famous. This being is thought to represent a powerful rain deity or an earth spirit, and variations of this imagery appear in many subsequent cultures. Other Olmec motifs, such as the feathered serpent, a precursor to the Maya Kukulkan and Aztec Quetzalcoatl, also begin to appear during this period. The Olmec essentially created a visual language of power and divinity that resonated across Mesoamerica. The concept of a ceremonial center with pyramids, plazas, and strategically placed monuments, as seen at La Venta and San Lorenzo, also became a blueprint for many later Mesoamerican cities. While other cultures developed their own unique architectural styles, the underlying Olmec idea of a sacred landscape, designed to reflect cosmological principles and serve as a stage for ritual and political power, was highly influential. Even the practice of orienting buildings to specific astronomical events may have Olmec roots. Then there's the Mesoamerican ball game. While the exact origins are debated, the Olmec are strong contenders for having formalized or popularized this ritual sport. Rubber balls have been found at Olmec sites, and imagery related to the ball game, including figures in ballplayer attire, appears in Olmec art. The ball game, with its deep ritual and cosmological significance, sometimes involving human sacrifice, became a near-universal feature of later Mesoamerican civilizations. Historians still argue whether the Olmec ball game was played with the same rules or had the same specific ritual connotations as later versions, but their early involvement seems clear. Writing and calendrical systems are other areas where Olmec influence is debated, but likely significant. While the Olmec themselves did not leave behind extensive texts like the Maya, they did use symbols and iconographic elements that may represent an incipient form of writing. The Cascajal block, a serpentine slab discovered in the Olmec heartland and dating to around 900 BCE, contains a series of incised signs that some scholars believe represent the earliest writing system in the New World. However, it's an isolated find, and its interpretation is still contentious. More clearly, the long count calendar, famously used by the Maya, appears to have earlier roots, with Stela C from Tres Zapotes, associated with Epi-Olmec culture, bearing one of the oldest known long count dates. This suggests that the foundational concepts of this sophisticated timekeeping system may have developed in the Olmec sphere of influence. A quirky tidbit regarding Olmec influence can be seen in the Olmec blue jade. The Olmec prized a particular blue-green variety of jadeite, sourced from the Motagua Valley in Guatemala. This specific type of jade was highly sought after and became almost synonymous with Olmec prestige. Later cultures like the Maya also valued jade immensely, but the Olmec seem to have set the standard for its ritual and elite importance. The effort they expended to acquire this material from distant sources underscores the extensive trade networks they established or participated in. The spread of Olmec culture wasn't a monolithic wave of Olmecification. Instead, it was a complex process of interaction, adoption, and adaptation. Local cultures took Olmec ideas and objects and reinterpreted them, blending them with their own traditions. This created a rich tapestry of regional styles and practices that still bore the imprint of Olmec innovation. So, while the colossal heads themselves mostly stayed home, guarding their Olmec heartland, their smaller artistic cousins, their religious ideas, and their ways of organizing society and understanding the cosmos, went on extensive travels, leaving indelible marks on the civilizations that would follow. The Olmec may have faded, but their echoes resounded through Mesoamerican history for centuries, a testament to their foundational role in shaping that unique and vibrant cultural world. As you drift further, you can imagine these ideas, like seeds, being carried on the wind to fertile new ground. Every civilization, no matter how mighty or influential, eventually faces its twilight. The Olmec, who laid so much of the groundwork for Mesoamerican culture, were no exception. Their great ceremonial centers, like San Lorenzo and La Venta, once bustling with activity, the air thick with the smoke of incense and the sounds of ritual, eventually fell silent. Their monumental sculptures gradually reclaimed by the persistent green of the tropical forest. The decline of the Olmec civilization, roughly between 400 BCE and 300 BCE, wasn't a sudden dramatic collapse like a Hollywood disaster movie, but more of a gradual fading, a slow unwinding of the complex social and political systems that had supported them for nearly 1,000 years. Why did this happen? As with many ancient societal declines, there's no single universally accepted answer. It was likely a combination of factors, internal and external, that slowly eroded the foundations of Olmec power and led to the abandonment of their major heartland centers. You can almost picture the last Olmec ruler looking out over a slowly emptying plaza, perhaps wondering where all the good times and the tribute had gone. Maybe he blamed the kids and their newfangled post-Olmec music. One prominent theory points to environmental changes and ecological stress. The Olmec heartland, while fertile, was also a delicate ecosystem. The Olmec relied heavily on riverine resources and agriculture in the alluvial plains. Shifts in river courses, perhaps due to silting or tectonic activity, could have disrupted their agricultural base and transportation routes. The Coatzacoalcos River, for example, which was central to San Lorenzo, is known to have changed its course over time. Prolonged droughts or periods of increased flooding could also have severely impacted their ability to produce food surpluses, which were essential for supporting a large population and a non-food producing elite class of rulers, priests, and artisans, the very people commissioning and carving those colossal heads we've been so peacefully pondering. Deforestation, as the population grew and more wood was needed for fuel, construction, and perhaps for clearing agricultural land or even firing pottery, could have led to soil erosion and further environmental degradation. Internal strife and social unrest are another likely contributor. Maintaining control over a hierarchical society, with a powerful elite commanding significant labor and resources, requires a delicate balance. If the rulers were perceived as failing in their duties, perhaps unable to ensure good harvest through their rituals, or unsuccessful in warfare or trade, their authority could be challenged. There is some archaeological evidence, like the deliberate mutilation of monuments we discussed earlier, that could be interpreted as signs of internal conflict, rebellion, or the violent overthrow of ruling dynasties. Perhaps the common folk finally got tired of hauling giant stones and decided to express their dissatisfaction in a rather direct, basalt-on-basalt manner. External pressures, such as the rise of competing centers of power in other regions, might have also played a role. As other groups in Mesoamerica grew in complexity and strength, they may have disrupted Olmec trade routes, challenged their dominance over prestige goods like jade, or even engaged in direct conflict. The emergence of new polities in areas like Oaxaca, the Maya lowlands, or the central Mexican highlands could have shifted the geopolitical landscape, gradually marginalizing the Olmec heartland. Another factor often considered is the possibility of disease. While direct evidence for specific epidemics is hard to come by in the archaeological record, large, relatively dense populations, like those at San Lorenzo and La Venta, would have been vulnerable to the spread of infectious diseases, which could have had a devastating demographic impact. A mainstream historical fact is that after about 400 BCE, the classic Olmec ceremonial centers in the Gulf Coast heartland show clear signs of decline and depopulation. La Venta, for instance, seems to have been largely abandoned, its monumental construction ceasing. San Lorenzo had already declined much earlier, around 900 BCE. However, Olmec culture didn't just vanish overnight. Instead, it seems to have transformed. In the region around Tres Zapotes, a culture known as Epi-Olmec or Post-Olmec emerged, carrying on some Olmec traditions but also developing new characteristics, including more complex forms of writing, like that seen on Stela C. This suggests a dispersal of population and a shift in cultural focus, rather than a complete societal collapse. Historians still argue about the primary drivers of the Olmec decline. Was it a catastrophic environmental event, a slow internal decay of social structures, or a gradual outcompeting by rising neighbors? The answer is probably all of the above, in varying degrees and combinations. It's rarely one single thing that brings down a civilization. It's usually a confluence of pressures that overwhelm its capacity to adapt. One quirky or fringe tidbit sometimes floated, though without much serious academic traction, involves more esoteric explanations for civilizational collapse. Like a loss of spiritual faith, a failure of the shamanic rulers to maintain cosmic balance, or even, in wilder theories, interactions with otherworldly beings who then departed. Sticking to the more grounded explanations, it's clear the Olmec world underwent a profound transformation. The era of colossal head carving largely came to an end, though their influence, as we've seen, continued to resonate. The fading of the Olmec is a poignant reminder of the cyclical nature of civilizations. They rose, they flourished, they innovated, and then their time passed, leaving behind enigmatic traces for us to puzzle over. The silence that fell over La Venta and San Lorenzo was eventually filled by the sounds of the returning jungle, which tenderly, or perhaps indifferently, began to cloak the great pyramids and the solemn stone faces. It's a slow, quiet process, this reclaiming by nature, and perhaps as you drift deeper into sleep, you can imagine that gentle encroachment, the vines snaking over carved stone, the roots patiently dislodging ancient plazas as one chapter of human history softly closed. Centuries, indeed millennia, have passed since the last Olmec artisan laid down their stone tools, since the great ceremonial centers of San Lorenzo and La Venta pulsed with life. The Olmec civilization itself faded into the deep past, its name and specific history largely forgotten, until the diligent work of archaeologists like Melgar and Sterling began to bring it back into the light. Yet, the colossal heads, those stoic, powerful visages, have endured. More than just archaeological artifacts, they have transcended their ancient context to become potent symbols in the modern world, icons of mystery, indigenous heritage, and the deep, rich history of Mexico and Mesoamerica. Their journey from buried relics to global ambassadors of a lost world is a fascinating story in itself. When the heads were first rediscovered and brought to wider public attention in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they were, as we've seen, sources of considerable academic debate and public fascination. Their African-looking features, as initially described by some, sparked those early speculative theories about transoceanic contacts, though these have long been superseded by a consensus that the Olmec were an indigenous Mesoamerican people. Nevertheless, this initial visual distinctiveness, so different from classical European or Near Eastern antiquities, captured the imagination. They looked undeniably ancient, undeniably powerful, and undeniably different. This very uniqueness contributed to their iconic status. As archaeological understanding of the Olmec grew, and their position as a mother culture became more widely accepted, the colossal heads took on new layers of meaning. They came to represent not just a lost civilization, but the very dawn of complex society in Mesoamerica. the fountainhead from which later, more familiar cultures like the Maya and Aztecs drew inspiration. This makes them incredibly important symbols of indigenous achievement and antiquity. In Mexico, they are celebrated as national treasures, powerful emblems of the country's profound pre-Columbian heritage. You'll find their images on currency, in museums, of course, in public art, and as inspiration for contemporary artists. They are a source of national pride, a tangible link to a deep and sophisticated past that predates European colonization by millennia. The heads have also become shorthand for ancient mystery. Their enigmatic expressions, the unknown details of the rulers they represent, the sheer audacity of their creation and transport, all these factors contribute to an aura of intrigue. They often feature in documentaries, books, and even fictional works that explore lost civilizations and ancient enigmas. They invite speculation, and even if some of that speculation veers into the fantastical, remember those sonic chisels and alien theories. It speaks to the power of these objects to ignite human curiosity about the past. They are, in a way, perfect foils for our modern desire to uncover hidden secrets and solve ancient puzzles. Good luck getting them to talk, though. Their lips are very much sealed. One mainstream historical fact is that the colossal heads are now found in museums not only in Mexico, like the renowned National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City and the Parque Museo La Venta in Villahermosa, Tabasco, which features several heads in an outdoor jungle-like setting, but also in collections and exhibitions around the world. Their presence in international museums has made them global ambassadors for Olmec culture in ancient Mesoamerica. While the ethics of displaying artifacts far from their origin can be complex, their international visibility has undoubtedly contributed to a broader appreciation of Olmec achievements. It's one thing to read about a giant stone head. It's another to stand before one, even thousands of miles from where it was carved, and feel its silent, ancient presence. A quirky tidbit. The colossal heads have even made their way into popular culture in sometimes unexpected ways. Replicas appear in theme parks. They've inspired characters in video games, and their distinctive aesthetic occasionally pops up in graphic design or advertising. This broader cultural diffusion, while sometimes trivializing, also speaks to their instantly recognizable and compelling visual power. They've become part of a global visual lexicon of ancientness. You just know, when you see that distinctive helmet and those full lips, you're dealing with something seriously old and probably quite important. However, for the descendants of Mesoamerica's indigenous peoples, and for many Mexicans in general, these heads are more than just cool artifacts or symbols of mystery. They are tangible connections to ancestors, evidence of a sophisticated and autonomous cultural development that thrived long before the disruptions of conquest. They challenge colonial narratives that often downplayed or ignored the achievements of indigenous civilizations. The enduring power of the Olmec colossal heads lies in their ability to embody this deep historical continuity and resilience. Historians still argue about the precise interpretations of their iconography or the exact nature of Olmec political organization. But what is not in dispute is their profound cultural significance, both in antiquity and today. They are silent witnesses to a lost world, yet they speak volumes about human ingenuity, artistic expression, and the enduring quest for power and permanence. As you gently drift, consider how these stone faces, once perhaps known only to the inhabitants of a few tropical river valleys, now gaze out at a global audience, their expressions unchanged, still holding their ancient secrets, but now also carrying the weight of modern interpretations and a legacy that continues to unfold. They have become timeless, their stony features a bridge across the vast expanse of human history. And so, our long, unhurried journey through the world of the Olmec colossal heads begins to draw to its inevitable, sleepy close. We've journeyed from the humid jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco, where these stone giants first startled the modern world, back through the mists of time to the Olmec heartland. We've imagined the immense effort of quarrying and transporting these basalt behemoths from the distant Tuxtla Mountains, the patient artistry of sculptors coaxing expressive faces from unforgiving stone with tools of stone, and the societal structures that made such monumental undertakings possible. We've pondered who these powerful individuals might have been: rulers, ancestors, warriors, their identities now cloaked in the enigma of ages. We've seen them not just as static artifacts, but as dynamic elements within their culture, sometimes deliberately damaged or even recarved, their meanings shifting with the tides of Olmec history. We followed the echoes of Olmec influence as their artistic styles and cultural innovations spread far beyond their heartland, laying foundational stones for the great civilizations that would follow in Mesoamerica. We contemplated the slow fading of the Olmec world itself, the abandonment of their great ceremonial centers, and the gradual encroachment of the jungle over their once mighty works. And finally, we've seen how these ancient faces have re-emerged in our own time, transformed into global icons, symbols of Mexico's deep past, and enduring testaments to the ingenuity and artistry of a people who shaped their world with vision and immense labor. The colossal heads remain, in many ways, as mysterious as when José Melgar first reported his astonishing find at Tres Zapotes. We have learned so much, piecing together fragments of evidence, deciphering the silent language of stone and context. Yet so many questions linger, like the humid air that still clings to their ancient forms. What specific rituals were performed before them? What were the precise meanings of the intricate symbols on their headdresses? What were the names, the personal stories of the individuals whose likenesses they bear? These are questions that the stones themselves hold close, their expressions offering no easy answers, only a profound and unwavering gaze that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the shifting of landscapes, and the endless turning of the cosmic cycles that so fascinated their creators. One final mainstream historical fact to gently tuck away is that, despite the immense amount of research, no Olmec colossal head has ever been found with definitive, decipherable hieroglyphic inscriptions naming the individual depicted. This lack of direct textual identification contributes significantly to their enduring enigma, leaving us to interpret their identities through artistry, context, and comparison. And for a final quirky tidbit, imagine the sheer surprise of the first local farmer who, while clearing his field, struck not yielding earth but unyielding, carved basalt, the sudden appearance of a colossal ancient face peering up from the soil. It must have been a moment of profound wonder, perhaps a little fear, and certainly a story that would be told and retold in the village for generations, long before any archaeologist arrived with notebooks and trowels. Historians still argue about the precise nature of the Olmec political system, whether it was a unified state, a series of allied chiefdoms, or something else entirely. The distribution and stylistic variations of the heads play a role in these ongoing discussions, each stone a silent piece of evidence in a grand historical puzzle. But now, as the details of headdresses and the textures of stone begin to soften in your mind, as the weight of those multi-ton sculptures feels less like a burden of inquiry and more like a gentle pressure guiding you towards rest, Let the Olmec heads continue their silent vigil in the landscape of your imagination. Picture them in their original settings, perhaps once brightly painted, surrounded by the vibrant life of their ceremonial centers, the air filled with the sounds of drums and flutes, the scent of burning copal. Or picture them as they are now, some in museums, bathed in soft light, others in outdoor parks, slowly gathering moss, forever gazing out with that same timeless, patient expression. They are a reminder that even the grandest human endeavors eventually become part of the deeper strata of time, their stories whispered by the wind and the rustling leaves. The Olmec sought a form of immortality in these stone portraits, and in a way they achieved it. Their faces, carved with such care and effort, continue to speak to us across the vast gulf of centuries, not in words, but in the universal language of human presence, power, and the enduring mystery of our shared past. Let their quiet strength be a soothing presence as you drift away. Word count 1090. The weight of the stone, the depth of the jungle, the unblinking eyes of forgotten rulers, all these images begin to blend and soften now. The sharp edges of inquiry blur into the gentle curves of impending sleep. The Olmec and their colossal heads have shared some of their ancient secrets with us tonight. Secrets carried on the slow, steady rhythm of our journey together. There is no need to hold on to every detail, every date, every debate among scholars. Let them all go, like leaves drifting down a quiet jungle stream. What remains is the feeling, the impression of immense antiquity, of human endeavor, of a world both strange and strangely familiar. The voices of the past are now just whispers, mingling with the soft hum of the fan, or the quiet of your room. The stone sentinels are at rest, and soon you will be too. There is nothing more to uncover tonight, nothing more to analyze. The story has been told and the time for quiet has come. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort, feeling the gentle pull of slumber. The Olmec will keep their watch. Sweet dreams.